Although I think, Sebastian, to your question, it really depends on how this turns out. If this turns into a total war at some point, which we shouldn't imagine, because it would be scary if both sides just, I mean, Ukraine is kind of just ready to put as much as is needed to just hold back the line, but they will stop at something of 2 to 3 million people who can reasonably mobilized without being able to not give them a gun in the end. And Russia theoretically could go for something like 10 million if they had to. It's just that we don't want to see that, and by that point, casualties would become very, very important. But as of now, they are a number, and I mean, as long as we don't see the war for Russia as an existential crisis, as an existential struggle, which of course the Russian state media is trying to pump into the people, that this is a fight for Russia's survival, that if we do not win this, Russia will collapse, and the West is trying to get us. As long as it doesn't turn into that, I think casualties do matter a lot, because we have seen that in the wars in Chechnya and also a lot of other post-Soviet conflicts, that there it is very important whether the state decides to send thousands and thousands of people to die somewhere. If the people at some point say it is not worth it, what's the point of this? And for Ukraine, they have less of a problem, because for them it's much more clear that if they stop fighting, then Russia will just push through, and it's unclear what the Russians will do. Will they just puppet Ukraine? Will they split it up into many different parts? Will they say, well, western part of Ukraine is now in its own state, and the rest will be taken by us? They don't know, but the Ukraine that they know will be gone. And for Russia, that is less clear, which is why I think as long as the Russian state doesn't succeed in convincing its people, casualties are very important, because at some point the Russians would say, what's the point? We can stay where we are. We can sign it like as ceasefire and just end it here.
I agree.
They pulled out from Afghanistan for less casualties than what we have now.
Yeah, which is a bad sign, because it means that the Russians right now are ready
to take more.
That was a different Russia, because that time it was like a much more open societies. It was Gorbachev, I think, was if I remember well. So it was much more free to talk for the society than now.
So World War I is a bit different, because World War I is a total war. Like every country is going all out. It's total war. So if one offensive, we are talking about 1-2 million troops offensive. Like they push with 1-2 million troops, fight over 2-3 months, and then most of them die. The kind of crazy war. So, but that's total war. In the current war, there is only one side is fighting a total war. Ukraine is fighting a total war. They are going all out. Like they don't really care about their future anymore. They don't care about the future economy, the population demographic. They don't really care. It's just we must win, all out. Russia is not even at war. Officially, it's only a special military operation, and that makes a big difference, because if they are not at war, they cannot actually do a lot of things. Which is why they have to make up. Putin have to make up excuses, even as much as he's a so-called dictator or authoritarianism guy, but he still have to bound by certain constitution and law. So to do the mobilization, he have to annex the territory first before he can justify why they need the mobilization, to do all these things. But they're still not at war yet, so they cannot deploy in a warlike manner. So which means their casualty numbers is very important to the Russian side. For the Ukrainian side, it's really all out. So that's a big difference, because if you look at another war, for example, the wars, all those wars involving Israel, 6-day war or whatever, they are not a total war. It's just a war. They attack. When the professional army or the standing army was largely defeated, they just gave up. The war ends. Usually they end within a week. So 6-day war is only 6 days. I think the Yom Kippur also is not much longer. So which is why this war is very special, because Ukraine is not giving up, even when the standing army was largely destroyed or largely disabled, and they continue to mobilize, continue to put more and more in. We don't see that in the Arab wars. So this war is so special. I think that's why also Russia miscalculated. They never expected Ukraine would go all in a total war way, because if your military is largely dismantled, even half gone or even a quarter gone, you will collapse, because it's very hard to fight. But Ukraine just went on, and that shocks Russia, which is why the 6-month contract is not enough. and they have no means because they are not at war. They don't have the right bureaucracy or the legislations to allow them to reinforce the troops, and
Do
maybe
you
they
think?
needed the defeat.
But they are going to that way, I think, since a few weeks now. Putin is also referring to this like a war. I think he mentioned in several,
Yes.
maybe not official statement what he makes at the Duma, but as a common language in like interviews, he was talking like war. So I think maybe they will turn it to a point to a war, so they have these opportunities to mobilize more people and stuff.
Because what you all say is correct, because he's grooming the population to prepare for it. But like
Mhm.
without the Kherson defeat, without the Kharkiv defeat, he cannot mobilize the troops. It is because of the defeats the population got so pissed that everybody wants the mobilization. And I can confirm this because on the open mic we have Russians, or pro-Russian people or people in Russia. They literally, talk to the people on the ground. That's the ground sentiment. They are now pro-war. They were not so sure, at the beginning of this thing, but because of the defeat in Kherson, in Kharkiv, that kind of change. And so I think Putin, to upgrade this to a proper war, he still need to continue to prepare the ground for it, because if not, then you're going to have a negative sentiment, and then that will actually collapse his rule, I feel.
Yeah. Also, I mean, if he actually decides to officially declare war, it will be seen as a step of escalation. And until now, it seems that Ukraine is just meeting the steps. And if he then escalates it one more, like if Ukraine were to then say, well, you know what, we need a buffer surrounding our territories, they can also just tell some of their units to go into Russia itself and like just go to the next river, say we'll hold until here, like 5 kilometers in, and it wouldn't be seen as an escalation if the Russians officially then decide, well, it's at war, it's all fine now. We no longer pretend like it's not one. So I think he's also very much wary of getting a response that he doesn't really want. Because as long as he can keep it to this affair, and I mean the Ukrainians, apart from perhaps sabotage groups, never cross the border into Russia. They don't see a point in it because they don't want to anger the Russians into actually doing this. But if the Russians decide to do it, well, then there's no other choice for Ukraine but to think what is the most advantageous position to keep themselves alive.
Because I think it's a Pearl Harbor moment, right? You don't want to give the Russian a Pearl Harbor moment, because
Yeah.
that will you give them, it just galvanize the country, because that's what the Japanese did, and then it was a huge mistake, because instead of demoralizing them, you actually make everybody angry. I think the Crimean Bridge was actually pretty close. I got a feeling that was so close, and I think that was a big mistake on the Ukrainian side, because you blow the bridge, then they repair it, now back to square one. It is not that practical. I think you can blow the bridge if you are invading into Crimea, but no, they just blow it as a no. I think that
Yeah.
was
It
a
was
strategic
largely
mistake.
symbolic in the end. It was that was kind of the point of it.
Yeah,
But also, I think to have the West support, there are some red lines what they cannot really cross. So I think this is their only ace what they have, like the West supporting them with ammunition and knowledge and information and hardware. So they cannot afford to cross these lines, like going across Russia and do something stupid, because then they will lose the support. The support is getting fragile anyway, and so they have to maintain it. But back to the original question, I feel very optimistic about the state of the war now, like the spring, because I really hope that this arrival of these, I don't know exactly how much, but around like 150 um, uh, AFVs, and I don't know, like 300 IFVs and APCs can really change the face of the war. Also, just not because I think it will give a big push if there will be some fast achievements and success. It will be have a very big moral push to the Ukrainian side, and will do a very bad blow on the morale on the Russian troops, which they already have, I think. Plus, to facing these Western, how should I say, sophisticated armor and technology is very demoralizing, because they cannot really make any damage on those tanks. I'm sure about that. They doesn't even have like a rocket launcher which do this top hitting, like hitting the
Challenge.
tank from. Yeah. The Russians doesn't have the challengers are very strong. So anyways, so I think it will be like they will just face that. This is like very depressing. They will experience a lot of defeats, I think, and it will be very hard to maintain the troops on the field, even if they are will be the numbers will be there. I think the morale will go down for the Russians. I really hope this is what I hope that will happen.
Actually, I have to disagree with that, because I don't think the tanks are actually going to be this indestructible force that you're describing, because the majority of the tanks in this war have actually been destroyed by artillery, and none of the tanks, neither Western nor Russians, are actually designed for that. So these 155 or 100, I think the Russians use 52 millimeter shells, are just going to through the roof of any tank. Doesn't matter. The main advantage the Western weapons really have is just their sensors. If you can fight your enemy without them seeing you, without them knowing where you are, there is no artillery position that can fire on you. And in that aspect, they do have a significant advantage. But in terms of survivability, I kind of have to disagree with that.
I mean, they do have advantages in survivability, certainly. I think things that would be understated is, first of all, the state in which these weapons arrive. Since when we talk about the raw numbers of weapons which Russia has, they're huge, but most of them are now being crammed out of deep storage. And of course, these Soviet systems were designed to work somewhat reliably by just filling up fuel into the engine and just letting them run. But still, it's not the same as having your sensors work properly. It's not the same as having a reverse gear that goes faster than 4 kilometers an hour, but instead 30 kilometers an hour. It's not the same as the tank being faster at all and everything being welded to a very high precision. Which is why I think especially the high amount of Leopard tanks, if they manage to get their logistic rights, would be a big asset if they were to ever go for an offensive, because these tanks are very versatile if you take them tank on tank, and that would only happen if you ever were to go in the offensive. But sure, if you like just distribute these tanks as anything else, like any other tank you have, then there wouldn't be a huge difference. Like sure, as an individual tank, they're better. But by now, I'm also not too sure how much deciding these armored vehicles really are, because we're seeing how drones, how anti-tank weapons have become so lethal against them, especially on a cost-benefit basis, that I think unless you're talking about a concentrated push and you try to just go as fast and as hard through a defense as you can, I think we probably are overestimating how useful tanks are.
I have something to say on this. Okay, so the tanks and the artillery and all the equipment that's coming to Ukraine now, if you put all this together, you'll get a really good force. You have the Swedish artillery, the Caesar, the Panzerhaubitze 2000, the Archer. And I think they have almost 100 now, self-propelled, like really long-range guns. And they also have the Patriot system. So if you put the Patriot system on the front, the Russians will not be able to fly anywhere on the front. And then you pound them with the artillery and HIMARS, and then you push the tank forward. This is something the military in Europe have trained for 40 years. When I was in the army, part of northern Norway, we had a tank battalion, infantry and artillery, and this was this tiny valley where we were going to stop the Russians. And we always knew the Russian would have more equipment. That's why we had to have better tanks and better sensors. So and it looks like they're getting all the equipment they need. So if they do this right, there is like a handbook probably somewhere in the NATO system that they can pull out, that they have a really good offensive. But all these, if you take all these weapons separate, they're not really good. But if you take them all together and manage to do that, they will just push right through the Russians. They won't stand chance, because all these weapons have longer range and better sensors. I would rather have Archer artillery than 20 Russian artillery, because better range, and I can fire 10 precise artillery shells in 1 minute and take out. And these computers that are on board, firing computers, almost you won't need like GPS guided shell, because they're really, really good. So I really believe in this offensive.
And they have the thermal vision, night vision. The Russians doesn't have that. Also, like they can handle these tanks can handle more than one target at the time, so they are moving fast. And beside that, I forgot to say, it's not just the hardware, but they always say, like, at the end, it's always the soldier is the deciding factor. How the soldier is trained and how is the moral of the soldier. So beside the crew, which was also trained in Spain, England, Poland, Germany, I think, these tank crews, and Norway and Sweden. So they received very good training. They will have like knowledge of how to maneuver on the front lines, not like the Russian opponents. And beside that, they will have like, I think, like 10, 15,000 freshly trained military supporting troops on the ground. So the main thing, it will be all what we saw already in Lyman, when they were able to break through the front lines just with the Jeep, the Hummers with a machine gun on the top. Now I'm sure they really can do that with tanks now. And the front line was collapsing so quick over there, and the Russians just left the area, left all the equipment and stuff. So this is what I'm expecting, that this is what we will see now. I hope I will be right. It will be decided on the battlefield. It also depends on the weather highly, I think. But what I see from the Russian side, that they already gave up the offensive, but they started a month ago and didn't really do anything. Prigozhin already started to talk about it, like they have to strengthen the defense lines, and they started to hire like local contractors to build the defense lines. So basically, this is what they also worried, that this will start soon, and they will have a very tough time to keep those tanks, away from the defense lines.
What I believe actually that the Russian army, if they had better leaders, or Putin, or the military leadership, they could have won this war. But I think it will be the leaders who bring the Russian army down. If you look at Volodar again, they promoted that guy after he failed totally. So I believe, that it's Russian leadership that is dooming the Russian army, actually. And also when it comes, because I feel like they're not able to acknowledging anything. Like they're always, I saw at the same time the offensive in Vuhledar had just gone to shit. There was an interview with Putin, and he just said, the VDV is doing great now fighting. And just a day ago, they were just annihilated. So sometimes I wonder, is Putin getting the right information, or is the leadership getting the right information, or is every general just saying, I'm doing great, I'm killing? Because when it comes to the high mass kills, that's something I always did. they say they're 200% HIMARS. They destroyed 200% of the HIMARS that are supposed to Ukraine are supposed to have. And so I wonder then if some artillery guy just say, "Oh, I killed the HIMARS," and they just report this to the top, and no one knows what's really going on. I feel like that's the biggest problem the Russians have, because there's never a problem with anything. Always everything is going just as the plan. It's like, yeah.
I totally have to agree with this, because quite a few of the Russian generals, I think, are still very much Soviet-based. And the Soviets, I think they even had a mathematical formula of where to attack with what forces. And you just have to go up the chain of command. You send in the first group, and they say they get completely annihilated, but the sergeant doesn't want to have that on his resume, so he says, "Yeah, we fought tooth and nail. We killed twice as many Ukrainians as we lost, and we breached the first defensive line, and then retreated because the reinforcements came." And the general hears this, or the next one in line, and says, "Oh, so we managed to breach the first line of defense. Okay, send in the reinforcements. That means we can force a breakthrough." So he sends in the next guys, and they also get completely annihilated, but they also cannot admit that, because that would be on that one's resume. So that's a repeating devil's circle that just keeps on giving, because no one can say, "Yeah, we got completely annihilated," and the general gets the wrong information, and obviously he can't say, "Yeah, we're almost getting a breakthrough, but I'm gonna stop the attack." And until he actually realizes we're not getting anywhere, we're just throwing men into the meat grinder and it's going nowhere. At that point, he can stop the attack, but that's hours or maybe even days after the first attack. And I think that's also what we saw at Bullet. They sent in the first guys, they hit mines, ran back, they sent in the next guys, and they probably said we cleared all the mines. And at that point, the next mines were laid, and the next group comes in, and they also get annihilated. And this repeats and repeats and repeats until at some point he realizes, "Oh, we're actually not getting anywhere." And at that point, the general has to say, "Yeah, okay, maybe this isn't working."
Yeah, but the funny thing is that they promoted that guy at the end of all this, when all this thing went to hell.
Yeah, obviously. He did exactly what the doctrine said. He got the information, we breached the first line, and he did exactly what he was supposed to do and send in the next guy.
He tried
the
hard.
fact that the entire operation was bullshit. Well,
so the one that the troop that was fighting at Voleda is the Marines. It's not the VDV. The VDV is actually fighting at Bakhmut. I think protecting the flank of the Wagner. And then but HIMARS, right, because that once upon a time I was tracking the HIMARS, right? So I never really counted more than like 200% kind of thing. Like I think the most is around 14, and sometimes it's a bit suspect because not too sure whether did they really see the right vehicle. Sometimes the video footage that they show is like not so sure if it's a HIMARS. So the 200%. So that's a problem with the Russian side of the Telegram channels and the sources as well, because some of them are really pro-Russia. Then they put out all the information that she just clouds everything. So which is why sometimes it's very weird. I get comments that saying things that I don't even know happened because they read it somewhere else, which I don't even know. Yeah, so I think the pro-Ukrainian side, the pro-Ukrainian people also read the pro-Russian side, and sometimes they catch all these lying channels or misinformation channels, and everybody just get confused and misunderstand one another. But yeah, I agree that the promotion is a bit funny. Like I don't understand the promotion as well. I was like, what did he do to get promoted?
He survived.
Yeah, but I think that's the problem. It's if nobody ever does anything wrong, you can't change anything. So you need to acknowledge that you're doing something wrong to make something.
Like
that's where they're failing.
It's because they can't really make mistakes, because if you make mistake, you are throw out the window, or you will be punished and stuff. Therefore, no one admits any mistakes. So and also they can't really do any decisions themselves. They don't want to do decisions because they don't want to take responsibility, because then they will be the one who blamed if they will fail. So instead, they just follow the order which is coming from the top, and then this I'm out of here. Nobody. It's not my fault. And the
I
I
people
actually
are
asked
dying.
No, sorry. you
sorry.
go.
I actually asked the exact same question on Twitter. Actually, how the units operate. Like, no, I fire at the tank and then I just assume that it was destroyed. I just report, and then I tell my immediate unit commander that, oh, I destroyed a tank, and the unit commander will just assume that it's true. How are they going to fact check? Then they're going to just send the report up and just go up the chain, and as a result, I believe on both sides, they get inflated number of units and equipment destroyed. I think it happens on both sides. Do you think the Ukrainians have the same problem? Because it sometimes it does feels like it, like there is also, because they are also Soviet military. The NATO forces have been trying to train them, but there is a lot of reports or information, anecdotal maybe, that they can't change. Their mindset is very Soviet like. The way how they operate is very Soviet like. So do you think the Ukrainians have the same problems in terms of this?
That's regarding the inflated numbers. As I said earlier, I've really been watching the numbers the last couple of months, and I feel the Ukrainian numbers are, some days they actually prove all of their equipment. They have a video of everything. So, and also if you look back to Oryx, if you look at the Oryx stat and what the Ukrainians are claiming a lot more, obviously. But if you look at what the Russians are claiming compared to the Oryx stat, it's just they've killed 400% of the Ukrainian Air Force already. Like, it's insane how much they killed. All the M777s, they killed 200% of the HIMARS. The numbers are just.
I've heard that the Ukrainians are asked to make photo and video of every kill possible. It's not just because to prove it, but also they use it for propaganda purposes as well.
Yeah.
This is what you see on YouTube. But also, if they have an opportunity, sometimes they don't have. But if they have an opportunity, they have to do photos. Plus, they have a lot of drone footages as well. So, for example, from the technique, you saw how many tanks are there on the fields everywhere.
Yeah, because I haven't seen any. Okay, so the Russians claim to have destroyed so much equipment. Where are it? Where are the videos? Where are the equipment? Where is it?
They don't have as good drones as the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have better
but they
drones.
have the Lancet drone. They have the Lancet drone with the camera and also observation drone. So if they had a picture of a HIMARS, they would show it, because that would be the really good propaganda victory. So if you destroyed hundreds of HIMARS and don't have a single picture,
I'm quite sure they wouldn't have images of HIMARS, because HIMARS is way more into the rear. I don't think the Lancets can fly that far. But if you talk about the tanks in the front, yeah. But I do think that there is a problem because of the Russian military. They are not allowed to just publish stuff, and they are really poor at information warfare. Like, the Russians really don't know what to show. If you look at pro-Russian channels, they're always criticizing the Russian military. Why are you so lousy at your information warfare and your propaganda?
Going back to the rigid command structure, going back to the original point
and it's still this TV-based information, because the TV can get to anywhere, even to Siberia and things like that. But it's still like they have these TV personalities who's having these daily shows But those are also just like talk shows, you know. It's not really any facts are shown there, you know.
I think one really has to differentiate between information war inside the country and outside, because if you look at the Russian propaganda for the Russian, I think it's really, really good. I mean, if you don't have any information from the outside, I think Russian propaganda is really convincing because you don't have any way to fact check. But once you see those claims in no longer in a vacuum, but with the corresponding information that you can get from outside sources, at that point it becomes really bad, because at that point it becomes completely ridiculous. I mean, if I'm a Russian sitting in Siberia and I'm looking at these TV talk shows and they're talking about, yeah, we should totally nuke Berlin, London, all of those countries. Why do they even have to exist? I mean, do they also have nukes? Well, whatever. But once you're outside and you're looking at the Russian army and they're struggling in Ukraine and they're talking about attacking NATO, and you're just sitting there, so what the fuck are you talking about? There is no way in hell you're ever gonna get close to any of that. And at that point, I think it just completely falls apart.
Yeah, I think you can also expand it more generally beyond this war, like the Russian TV, Russian state media within the country, of course, the way in which it's framing the West. There's quite little you can use and kind of distribute outside of Russia as any sort of piece of media that will support your point. I mean, when they talk about zoophilia in the West, or us trying to turn our kids gay, or only us saying parent one, parent two, it's just so obvious how ridiculous it is, and how it's not based on anything that has to do with reality. And when people actually decide to kind of look up what this is based on, it's never based on the truth. It's just always something that, if at all, has a grain of truth and is then spun out of proportion. And the images they draw up simply are so mismatched with reality that nobody who actually has seen the outside world will ever believe that.
But I believe in some way this propaganda is very useful for them, because if you look outside Europe, if you look to Africa or South America, when they talk about these birds that have the flu, or some of these countries actually believe this because they have so many bad experiences with the US. So if you look outside Europe, I believe that this Russian propaganda is really effective in some other parts of the world.
So
that's something that I actually really agree with. And that is, they had really bad experiences with the US. I think a lot of people don't necessarily believe the Russians because they believe they tell the truth. They believe the Russians because they tell something different than the West and different than the US. And therefore it has to be true because it's different. And because America went around in the 2010s and before that and fucked quite a few countries up, to be honest. I'm looking at the Middle East, and they have a really bad reputation at that point. I think a lot of external countries don't really care what the truth. They just look at, oh, that's not the position of the US. Okay, I'm all in. I can go with that. I'm fine with that.
I think that's also true for people here who really dislike America. I mean, it's obvious how the old European left, who always hated the Americans, who was already against the intervention in Yugoslavia when it was clear as day that as long as people slaughter each other and set up concentration camps, this is not going to end without intervention. They were against that. They were against any and all US involvement in anything. And you can see now people like Noam Chomsky, for example, make a big point about how the US is escalating this, and also other left-wing politicians of the old European left, at least in Germany. Our Socialist Party is kind of split, with its older members and the entire echelon who was there for a longer time, very much being pro-Russian, and incidentally meeting up with the right-wing party, who's also pro-Russian, and them kind of obviously having to pretend like it's not the same opinion, but it is in the end. And I think for them, it also plays into that the very like anti-American view.
Yeah. Another thing they have succeeded in is portraying themselves for handling the sanctions really good. So
That's what you
not
also doesn't know, like what are the real numbers and stuff. You can't check that too.
No, but I will try to explain something to you guys, because I've tried in the panel earlier or in the chat to talk to some guys who have no economics, try to explain the oil industry, but it's like they always try to argue against me. I'll try to break it down really easy here, what we're talking about, okay? So the Soviet Union, when they broke up, they had a lot of resources, and a lot of oil companies came in from the West. So mainly BP have been helping the Russians. And then when you find an oil field, you first have a drilling company to drill the valves. That's typically Transocean or Odfjell or Kusol, China Oil Service Limited. I work for that company. But all these rigs have European or Western equipment, even the Chinese ones. Then you build a production platform or production unit. This is also a lot of Western equipment, and then you pull the oil to a refinery and send it out. So, and the cost of this is, in Russia, I think it's $45 a barrel, the cost of doing all this. So what the Russian had, they had, let's say, 30% gas, 30% refined products like diesel and 30% crude. Let's divide their income like 3 ways. So the gas is mostly gone. Like there's no other part of the world that has built the infrastructure that every home can use gas and all the factories can use gas. No one has this. Europe has built this through 30, 40 years. So they may be able to sell some gas other places, but they won't get real money for it. Then you have the refined products. The reason why we in Europe don't have more refineries inside our countries is because of the pollution. So the last 20 years or 30 years, we've been happy with buying these products really expensive from Russia. So we didn't have to write all the CO2 on our own countries. So this is basically falling apart. Russia has no one to sell these refined products to. And also they're selling so much crude to India now that India is also selling a lot of diesel and refined products. So then you basically the gas is almost gone, the refined products is almost done, and then you're left with the crude oil. And then you get, okay, say people always say, but the oil price 3 years ago was $60 a barrel. It's the same now. Yes, it's the same, but they lost their 2 main other sources of income. So they could divide the money the $45 they take up. Now they just have the crude, and they have all the same expenses by doing all this taking up from the valves. And also all the countries have left, all the companies who do all this maintenance have left. And this is really high pressure systems, and you really need good maintenance done every quarter. And in 2 years' time, you need to have a real shutdown and change all main equipment. If not, it will fail. So sooner or later, this will fail for Russia because, So everybody just look at the oil price and say, oh, they're earning the same amount of money, but that's just wrong. And these sanctions, they're like, oh, look at last year. We earned so much money. Yeah, but these sanctions didn't start before this year. So now the first month of this year, they already had a really big deficit in the money. So
today they had this meeting with Xi Jinping, with the CCP, party leader, and this was one of the main point what he was highlighted, that the sanctions, he didn't say that the sanctions are hurt, but these sanctions are how dishonest or untruthful or something like that. So it really seems that these sanctions are it's a big problem getting to be for Russia now.
But I also think we shouldn't get too far ahead here. I mean, that's the thing.
But it will not stop them.
Russians saying they can
No,
always
it will not stop the war. It will not stop the war.
But it will hurt.
It will hurt, and it may be, if all the oligarchs in Russia are losing all their money, they may be able to push something. That's what we hope for. That the society will see that this is just going really bad for us.
But that's the sad thing. Russia has a politically disenfranchised society by now. I mean, everyone who was a political opponent was murdered over time. Mostly opposition has fled. You're sadly talking about a society where the last remnants of opposition, they don't really do anything. And it's not like they can, because the second one guy stands up, they're immediately put down again. And the only thing I think you can really choke the state is by what you kind of just outlined, choking the revenue. And it's true with gas, because for gas, they cannot build the infrastructure as fast. And also the Chinese market is not as big as the European one. The European one is the biggest gas market in the world. And also, it's not like India and China will need as much energy or grain or whatever as Europe did. It's just that at some point you can't keep pushing back and forwards the resources. There simply is not a customer base for it yet. So there is definitely issues, but I think especially regarding the oil, a lot of these things are like soft factors. Sure, these maintenances need to be done. And I mean, you know a lot about it, but would you think that if they manage to somehow survive for the next 2 years, set up new systems, I don't know, shift around, new companies being founded, new policies being implemented, that they could like keep their oil industry alive somehow?
Well, the biggest oil company in the world are actually still in Russia. Schlumberger. This is the oil service company, and this company, nobody actually talks about this, but it's allowed to stay in, so the Russian oil can continue flowing, because no one in the West really wants the Russians to shut off all their oil production. Then we will just be deep shit. The oil prices will just skyrocket. So we're still helping them, but they have to pay. I just read a report about how much this company is earning now. It's just, they're like blackmailing the Russian government. So yeah, but so there is a plan behind everything. But I think it will. There is still an elite in Russia, and I think it will hurt them. There have been, I think, 2 of the oligarchs have just last week had some statements in the press. I can't remember what they said, but yeah.
I want to talk about the opposite side, because the Russians definitely do feel the sanction somehow. At least even if it doesn't, like what the pro-Russians like to say, it does give them a lot of problems. Very troublesome. They need to shift their entire market segments away from Europe. But how about Europe? How about how is the West able to continue to support and sustain Ukraine war effort? Because Europe is suffering tremendously as well, because these sanctions are affecting Europe a lot. Especially, I think Germany have takes the brunt of the damage, because they needed a gas to keep the cost of production low, and now without it, is affecting their industry severely. What do you guys think? Can the West continue to keep up the support?
Yes, I think the West has never been stronger than they are in this matter. If you look at the previous wars in Iraq or Afghanistan, or the West have never been stronger. And I feel that Germany took this choice early in the war when they said we won't use. When they took part with Ukraine, I feel like EU, we're already taking this choice, and I feel like it's not a problem for us to continue supporting them. Like especially not Norway. But Norway just agreed to a long-term plan, so we're giving them 7 billion euros or dollars or whatever over a 5-year period. So if the Russians are hoping for that we stop supporting Ukraine, that's just no.
Yeah, this is what I see also. The energy prices went back almost to the prices which were before the war started, like fuel prices and the gas prices. The stock is really good. The main problem what we had, the biggest problem what we have is the inflation, but what was generated by the US after COVID effect. It's not again, not because of the war. And to be honest, we never lived so good than it was during the Cold War, when we didn't have to, we were basically sanctioned everything on the East, like the Soviet Union, for example. That was, the 80s was the best time for Europe, the big thrive. And so this is what I feel also like, and as an American analyst said, like, we can't beat Russia, as an American said, an American analyst, that US cannot beat Russia so cheap like now they do it like now. So the support what they spend is basically just a small, really small price to get rid of their like almost like 70, 80 years enemy, and not get rid of them, but we'll see.
I think
regarding the gas, Germany have already a new deal with Qatar. They signed in the summer. So from next year, I think they will receive gas from Qatar. So they will never go back to Russia, never. They have 15-year agreement with Qatar from next year, I think.
I think what is most important to kind of note with the European and Western perspective is that it's theoretically not a question of possibility. The resources are there. If you were to commit and just say, you know what, we will also try to integrate into a supporting war economy, this could happen in limited time if the need would arise and if the will were there. And also supporting Ukraine, if you combine the power of all the Western economies, it would be a drop in the bucket. Like it's especially for the US, who's spending hugely on their defense, the way in which they're grounding down the Russian military as a threat to any and all European security, it's pretty cost effective. It's just that the political will, especially in countries like Germany, and I think also in other countries in Central Europe, is definitely not secure. Especially in the past months, you can see how the populist parties on the left and the right have been using Ukraine as an example to say, well, there's money going there. We could also use the money to fix the pavements. Of course, you can always, right? But it's just an easy argument to make, and something that, in my opinion, disregards what our geopolitical interests really are. But people will say, well, we're doing the US's bidding. This is a fight between, I don't know, the US and Russia, and therefore we shouldn't use our money there. And it is a stance that is not entirely unpopular. I think the left and the right together have like 30% of the vote by now. It is definitely something that can threaten that, because I mean, if Germany's out or if France were out, question is if the US continues to stay in as well. If DeSantis were to be elected, or Donald Trump instead of I don't know, Biden too, being 80 something, or somebody else from the Democrats, this could all very much change. And that is all that Western's is kind of based on the political will. But from a pure...
No, but I feel like if you look at the Vietnam War, or if you look at the Vietnam War or the Iraq War, they didn't have much support in the population. None of those wars, but they still keep fighting them. It's not like in these matters, when it comes to war, it's not like it's a popularity contest. This is something that actually the politicians decide for us. And we always talk about how strong the defense industry is in the US, and all these things. And for them just to quit because some politicians or someone say it, is just, I feel like this, I think the war will, I don't think it's important with popularity and the supporting the people, but I don't think it's essential for the war in Ukraine. I think the war will go on anyway.
To return to your question about the sanctions, I think you should never underestimate just how much money the Western world can actually throw at a problem. I mean, you just have to look at the resources and the energy prices. What happened when Russia, or when the West sanctioned Russia and Russia no longer provided oil and gas and coal? Well, suddenly every other country in the world had problems with electricity prices while the lights in Europe were still on. We simply outbid everyone. We had the money to just throw cash at the problem, and you should never underestimate just how deep these coffers really are. I mean, look at COVID. I think the US put out like $2 trillion in aid, and Europe as well did pretty much the same. We're nowhere close to these numbers. You should never underestimate just how much cash you can throw around, and especially at a problem, if the populace agrees. And energy prices is something that's relatively easy to sell. So you should really just look at the rest of the world. I mean, I think it was Sri Lanka and some other places around Africa, and just had massive problems with their electricity grid because they just could not afford anywhere close to the gas prices that were in the open market, especially LNG, because it was transportable. Because Europe just said, okay, we're gonna buy it. Don't name the price, we're just gonna pay. I don't care.